Hey there guys, Nordic Warrior here, back with another prediction video. I know I've been on a roll with these lately. It's weird, I just got the urge to start doing these again, I don't really know why, but I digress. So, somebody in the comment section of my last video brought a pretty interesting fight to my attention that I didn't even know was happening. I've seen no promotion for this fight whatsoever, I haven't seen anything about it. If it wasn't for that comment, I wouldn't even know it was happening. So, Gilberto Ramirez, who is now campaigning as a cruiserweight. I believe he's only had one fight in the cruiserweight division, and that was his stoppage victory over Joe Smith, where he looked pretty good, who himself is a former light heavyweight champion. He's going to be getting a shot at the WBA cruiserweight title against the reigning champion Arsen Goulamirian. Now, Goulamirian's a fighter who I've known for a long time. He's a Armenian fighter who's based in France. Pretty much all his major fights as a professional have been in France, and he's had that WBA title for several years now. I think he had the title in, I want to say it was 2018, 2019, he picked up that title, something like that, and he's had it for a while. However, strangely enough, he's barely fought at all since winning the title. I think in the past 5 years or so, he's had about 2 fights, and some of you might remember back in 2022, he fought Alexei Egorov, who was an undefeated Russian contender, but a guy who himself had been very inactive and had only had about 11 fights in his career, so yeah, he was vastly inexperienced. And that was a very, very close fight, a back-and-forth war, very difficult one. Goulamirian won pretty clearly, but it was a very close fight where he really struggled down the stretch. And since then, he hasn't fought. This is going to be his first fight since. So yeah, he's been very, very inactive as a champion. And you wonder how he's been able to hold on to that WBA title with being so inactive. But I digress. That happens sometimes in boxing. I think sometimes these guys slip under the radar and the sanctioning bodies don't really act on it. But yeah, this fight's interesting to me. It's going to be happening in America. So Gilberto Ramirez, of course, being a Mexican who's based in America, he's going to be the home fighter, despite the fact that he's challenging for the title. Now, it's interesting to me. So, Goulamirian, for those of you who don't know, he's a very, very strong, very, very well-built unit of a guy. He's a very big puncher, has many early knockouts. I believe he has like 18 knockouts out of like 25 fights, something like that. So, very, very high knockout percentage. His competition hasn't really been great. He's fought decent guys. I mean, he's fought some like decent fringe contenders, guys like Mark Flanagan, for example. And I mentioned already he beat Egorov in a close fight. So he's had okay competition. He's kind of fought the second-tier fringe contenders in the cruiserweight division, but hasn't really had any marquee wins yet. So it's really hard to say how good he is. I definitely think he's a legit puncher. The guy's got a lot of power, maybe one of the bigger punchers at cruiserweight. And if you look at the guy, he's just a unit. Like, the guy just looks very, very strong and stocky and durable. And, you know, he kind of reminds me of Murat Gassiev. I know he was trained by Abel Sanchez, just like Gassiev was, so that'll explain why he has such a similar fighting style. But me personally, I don't think he's quite as good as Gassiev. I think Gassiev is a little bit more powerful and a little bit more athletic and just has slightly better boxing skills than Goulamirian. But Goulamirian, you get the point. He's a similar type of fighter. Strong, stocky, powerful, durable guy. And a handful for anybody at cruiserweight. What concerns me about Goulamirian, however, is he seems to be a little bit one-paced to me. He seems to be a guy who is quite easy to time, doesn't have great defense. In the Egorov fight, he took a lot of shots. He was wide open for the jab coming forward. And as that fight went on, he started to fall apart a bit. So I question his stamina. You know, he doesn't look quite as destructive and powerful in the later rounds of fights as he does in the early rounds. And it isn't often that he goes 12 rounds. That was one of the few times in his career where he's done that. So I definitely question his stamina. He definitely has that bodybuilder-like physique. So in a hard, fast-paced 12 rounds, I really do question how good he would be at this level. So it's really hard to say how good Goulamirian is, because he just hasn't really had the competition to prove it. This is, of course, his opportunity. You know, he's fighting on the road in a major fight for the first time in his career, going over to America to fight easily the best opponent he's fought as of yet. and it's going to be interesting. So, Gilberto Ramirez, as you guys that have been following my channel will know, I really rate Gilberto Ramirez. In spite of all the setbacks he's had in his career, I genuinely believe he's one of the most talented fighters in boxing. You know, when he had that victory over Arthur Abraham several years ago to win the super middleweight title, I was very impressed by his speed, his lateral movement, his hand speed, his stamina, his combinations, the way that he utilizes the southpaw stance to take away your jab and to just outbox you at long range. I thought he looked very good in that fight. You know, great body puncher, great boxer from long range, very, very difficult to hit. And I thought he looked very good. Unfortunately, his career kind of stagnated a bit after that fight because he kind of went into obscurity, didn't really promote himself, didn't really take on the best competition, you know, fighting guys like Jesse Hart, you know, kind of second-tier contenders, you know, fringe contenders at super middleweight. And eventually he moved up to light heavyweight and campaigned there and had a couple of good wins. And then he got that title shot against Dimitri Bivol, the WBA champion at light heavyweight. And going into that fight, I was very intrigued by it. I thought he had a very good chance of winning. I thought since he had the size advantage, the height and reach advantage, and the experience advantage over Bivol, I honestly thought that Gilberto Ramirez had a great chance of pulling off the upset there. Unfortunately for Ramirez, something just wasn't right about that fight for me. Now, I've received criticism for basically insinuating that a lot of these fights in boxing are predetermined, but something in that Dimitri Bivol fight just didn't sit right with me. You know, in the early rounds of that fight, like you look at the first round, the second round, it's very, very clear to me that Gilberto Ramirez has all the tools to not only win the fight, but win the fight convincingly. I mean, he was able to outbox Bivol at long range. He was hitting Bivol with the jab. He was hitting Bivol to the body. And he was utilizing his long reach and his southpaw stance and his lateral movement very, very well. And to me, Dimitri Bivol looked a little bit flustered in there, didn't really know what to do. Then by about the third round, it was like Gilberto Ramirez just stopped. Like Bivol landed a couple of good shots and maybe shook him up a bit and staggered him. And for the rest of the fight, he just did nothing. He just stood there at long range like a dummy, barely threw any punches, wasn't using his jab, stopped working the body for the most part, and Bivol was able to just control the fight and win by a wide decision, and I was very, very disappointed in Gilberto Ramirez. It looked to me as if he threw the fight. That's what it looked like to me, so very, very disappointing. Now he's moved up to cruiserweight. The guy was absolutely massive for the super middleweight division, and he was very big for light heavyweight. As you could see, he was towering over Dimitri Bivol, and even fighting Joe Smith Jr. at cruiserweight, he looked considerably bigger in there. So I think right now Zurdo Ramirez is at the natural weight of his division of his career. I definitely think he's naturally a cruiserweight, and I think he'll be stronger. I think he'll be more durable. He won't enjoy the same kind of size advantage that he had at super middleweight and light heavyweight, but I think he'll do well as a cruiserweight. You know, he'll be able to eat more, he'll be able to hydrate more, and I just think he'll be a better fighter in general. And going into this Goulamirian fight, this is the perfect opportunity for him to become a three-weight or a two-weight world champion. Sorry, he was never a champion at light heavyweight, but he was a champion at super middleweight. So yeah, he'll be if he wins this fight, he'll be a two-weight champion. And I would love to see how he matches up against someone like Jai Opetaia. Obviously, he has to get by this fight first. How do I see this fight going? So, I've talked a little bit here about the deficiencies of Goulamirian, how, to me, he looks to me like a guy who gets a little bit ragged as a fight goes on. You know, he just looks to me like one of these bodybuilder fighters. Very, very strong, very, very well built, very, very compact, and very, very dangerous in the early rounds of a fight. But as I mentioned, that Egorov fight showed me that in a hard 12-round fight, where he has to really, really work hard down the stretch, he finds wanting, as far as I'm concerned. So I think that the longer this fight lasts, the more it favours Gilberto Ramirez, because one thing I can never criticise Gilberto Ramirez for is his fitness, right? That guy has excellent stamina. He can throw punches for 12 rounds if need be. and using lateral movement. You know, he always looks fresh down the stretch. And he's the significantly more experienced of the two, you know, fighting guys like Arthur Abraham, Dimitri Bivol, Joe Smith Jr., you know, world-class fighters. He's definitely fought considerably better competition throughout his career than Arsen Goulamirian has. So I definitely think he's going into this fight with significantly more experience. You have to take into consideration also that the fight's in America. So I'm pretty confident that Goulamirian isn't going to get any favours from the judges or the referee, you know, fighting a Mexican in America. So yeah, you've got to imagine and assume that the politics of the fight will favour Gilberto Ramirez. Also, I think Gilberto Ramirez's body attack will come into play here, because I've never really seen anybody attack Goulamirian's body relentlessly like I think Gilberto Ramirez will do from long range. The southpaw stance will be a factor too, the height and reach, because even though Goulamirian might be bigger in build and naturally heavier, I think that Ramirez is taller and has a longer reach in there. Now, obviously, I said the same thing before the Bivol fight. I talked about the reach advantage of Ramirez, and he didn't really use it as that fight went on. Hopefully, he's learned from that fight, and hopefully he's coming into this fight tactically prepared and knowing what he has to do, because I honestly think if we get the best version of Gilberto Ramirez in this fight, then I think he wins the fight, and I think he wins the fight conclusively. And the reason for it is I just think he's the better athlete of the two. I think he's so much fitter, so much faster. He's got much better footwork, much better hand speed, much better foot speed. He's a southpaw. He knows how to use the southpaw stance to his advantage. I mean, if you look at, again, I keep going back to that Arthur Abraham fight, his lateral movement in that fight and his work rate from long range was fantastic. But obviously he'll have to be a lot more careful because of the power, because obviously this guy's a cruiserweight, and I'm willing to assume he hits a lot harder than someone like Arthur Abraham, who was a middleweight in his prime. So yeah, I give Goulamirian a very good puncher's chance in the first half of the fight. But if he can't get Gilberto Ramirez out early, then I think Gilberto Ramirez will outbox him, and I think he will outwork him, and I think he'll beat him on points. I don't see Gilberto Ramirez stopping Goulamirian. I mean, it's possible that he could stop him on accumulation in the later rounds, but I don't think that's very likely. I think the most likely outcome of this fight is Gilberto Ramirez wins by a wide unanimous decision, and maybe has to survive a scare here and there, particularly early in the fight, because like I said, he's fighting a big puncher. So yeah, I'm going with Gilberto Ramirez to win by unanimous decision. I think that's the most likely outcome, and it's a fight that I'm very intrigued by, and I'm surprised that not many people are talking about this one, because I genuinely think that it's an interesting fight. So yeah, let me know what you guys think. I'm going with Ramirez on points. Thanks for watching, and God bless.